We spent 2 years saving for our anniversary getaway. The night before our flight, my mother called and said, "Your sister needs you to watch the kids." I said no. When we touched down, I had 43 missed calls. My name is Oliver, I'm 34. And that wasn't some casual vacation I was ignoring them for. No, this was something far deeper, years in the making. To truly understand, you need some context, because without it, you'd probably just think I'm some heartless jerk who abandoned his family. And honestly, I wish it were that simple. I've been married to my incredible wife, Juniper, for 7 years. Junie is one of those rare people who remembers everyone's birthday, sends handwritten thank you cards, and once drove 45 minutes in a rainstorm just to bring soup to a coworker she barely knew. She's simply a better human than I deserve, and I genuinely believe that. Now, my family, that's where things get complicated. I grew up in a house where everything, and I mean everything, revolved around my older sister, Darla. And look, I love Darla, she's my sister. But from the moment I was old enough to understand, it was painfully clear the family orbit had one son, and it definitely wasn't me. Darla was the first grandchild, the first to graduate college, the first to get married, the first to have kids. Every single milestone she hit was treated like a national holiday. When I graduated with honors from my engineering program, my dad literally said, and I quote, "That's great, but hey, did your mom tell you Darla's thinking about remodeling her kitchen?" I sat there in my cap and gown, feeling like a background extra in my own life. Darla married a guy named Rowan when she was 25. Rowan is, well, he's one of those guys who always has a great business idea that never quite works out. He's been a day trader, a crypto consultant, a life coach, and most recently, he started some artisan beef jerky company that lasted about 4 months before the health department shut it down. Through all of this, Darla stayed home with their 3 kids, Cody, Maisie, and Little Ro Jr., who everyone calls Bug for some reason. They're good kids, don't get me wrong. Chaotic, loud, capable of destroying a living room in under 6 minutes, but good kids. The problem is my parents, Hank and Lorraine, have spent the last decade acting like Darla's chaos is everyone else's responsibility. When Rowan's jerky empire collapsed, guess who loaned them rent money? Yep, Oliver. When Darla needed emergency dental work and their insurance lapsed because Rowan forgot to pay the premium, guess who covered it? Oliver. When they needed someone to watch the kids every other weekend so Darla could decompress, guess who rearranged his entire schedule? If you guessed Oliver, congratulations, you're seeing the pattern. And through all of this, did anyone ever say thank you? Did anyone ever acknowledge that maybe Junie and I had our own lives, our own plans, our own stuff going on? Not a chance. In my family, helping Darla wasn't a favor, it was an expectation. It was the absolute baseline. You didn't get credit for it, any more than you'd get credit for breathing. About 2.5 years ago, Junie and I were lying in bed, and she turned to me and said, "I want to go to Greece." She'd wanted to go since she was a little girl, ever since her grandmother showed her postcards from Santorini and told her stories about whitewashed buildings against water so blue it didn't look real. Her grandmother passed away before they ever got to go together, and that dream had been sitting in Junie's heart like an open tab ever since. So, we made a plan. We opened a separate savings account, set up automatic transfers, cut back on eating out, and for 2 years, we watched that number climb. $23,000. Flights, hotels, tours, spending money, all of it. We wanted to do it right. Our 7th anniversary was the target date, and we had been counting down for months. Junie and I had never really taken a real vacation together. Our honeymoon was a long weekend at a bed and breakfast 3 hours from home because I had just started a new job. Every single year since, something came up. Darla needed help. My parents had a thing. Money got tight because I'd loaned some to my sister again. Every single year, our plans got bumped for someone else's emergency. But not this time. This time, we had the money saved, the flights booked, the hotels confirmed, and 2 weeks of paid time off approved. Junie had bought a new sundress and a travel journal. I downloaded 3 different apps to plan our itinerary. We were leaving on a Saturday morning, and by Saturday night, We would be watching the sunset from a terrace in Athens. The Thursday before our flight, I made the colossal mistake of mentioning the trip at my parents' house during a family dinner. I'd been vague about it on purpose, just saying we were going on a trip, but my mom pressed, and I told them, Greece, 2 weeks, Saturday morning flight. My mom's face did this weird thing where her smile stayed in place, but her eyes went completely flat, like someone had flipped a switch behind them. She said, "Oh, that's a long trip." My dad didn't even look up from his plate. Darla asked how much it cost, and when I didn't answer, she sneered, "Must be nice to have that kind of money just sitting around." Rowan laughed. Junie squeezed my hand under the table. We left dinner early. Junie didn't say anything in the car for the first 10 minutes, and then she said, "They're going to try something. You know that, right?" I told her she was being paranoid. She gave me a look that said she loved me, but also thought I was being incredibly naive. She's always right. I really should start leading with that. Friday night, the night before our 6 a.m. flight, our bags were packed, lined up by the front door. Junie had laid out our travel outfits. I triple-checked the passports. We were in bed by 9:30 because we had to be at the airport by 4 a.m. Everything was perfect. My phone rang at 10:15. It was my mom. I almost didn't answer. Something in my gut told me not to. But decades of conditioning are hard to override, so I picked up. "Oliver, honey, I need you to listen to me," she said, and her voice had that tone. That specific tone she uses when she's about to frame a demand as a desperate plea. "Darla needs you." Here was the story. Rowan had apparently landed some last-minute consulting gig 3 states away. He was leaving Saturday morning and wouldn't be back until the following Friday. Darla, meanwhile, had a commitment she couldn't get out of, something about a wellness retreat she'd already paid for that was non-refundable. So, the kids needed someone to watch them for the entire week. "Mom," I said, sitting straight up in bed. Junie was already awake, watching me with an expression that can only be described as "I told you so" in human form. "We're leaving for Greece in the morning. You know this." "I know, honey, but this is family. Darla is really counting on you. She's been under so much stress lately." I took a long, slow breath. The kind of breath you take when you're choosing between saying what you want to say and saying what will keep the peace. For most of my life, I had chosen peace. Every single time. "Mom," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my chest. "I can't. We've been planning this for 2 years. The flights are booked. The hotels are paid for. I am not canceling." The silence on the other end lasted about 4 seconds, but it felt like a full minute. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. That pleading tone was gone, replaced by something colder, something that sounded like disappointment sharpened into a weapon. "I just think it's interesting," she said, "that you can spend thousands of dollars on a vacation, but you can't help your sister when she needs you. Your father and I did not raise you to be selfish, Oliver." I told her I was sorry she felt that way, but my answer was no. She hung up without saying goodbye. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from my dad. Just 5 words, "Family comes first, Oliver." Junie read the text over my shoulder and said, "What do you want to do?" I loved her for asking it that way. Not telling me, not pressuring me, just giving me the space to decide. I thought about every canceled plan, every borrowed dollar never repaid. Every moment I had put my own life on hold because someone else decided their needs were more urgent than mine. And I thought about Junie, who had waited her whole life to see Santorini, who had saved every spare dollar for 2 years. I turned off my phone, set my alarm for 3:30, and went to sleep. We boarded that plane at 6:02 on Saturday morning. When we landed in Athens 11 hours later, and I turned my phone back on, it nearly vibrated off the tray table. 43 missed calls, 27 text messages, and 1 voicemail from my mother that started with the words, "I hope you are happy." Yeah, I was about to be. The first voicemail was from my mom, left around 6:45, right around the time our plane was pulling away from the gate. "Oliver, this is your mother. I don't know what you think you're doing, but Darla is beside herself. Call me back immediately." Classic Lorraine. Not asking, telling. The second was from Darla herself. Her voice had that particular wobble she does when she's trying to sound like she's been crying, but hasn't actually committed to real tears yet. Oliver, I cannot believe you just left. I really needed you this weekend. Rowan is gone, and the kids are already being impossible. How could you do this to me? Note the framing. Not, how could you prioritize your wife and your anniversary and the trip you've been saving for? No, how could you do this to me? Because in Darla's world, every decision anyone makes is either for her or against her. The third was from my dad. Shorter. Your mother is very upset. Your sister is very upset. I don't know what has gotten into you, but this is not how we raised you. Call us. No mention of my trip. No acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, I had a valid reason for not being available. I turned my phone off again after that third voicemail and didn't turn it back on for 2 days. And those 2 days in Athens were incredible. We walked through the Plaka district with no plan and no schedule, just wandering through narrow streets lined with bougainvillea and stopping at whatever caught our eye. We ate at a tiny restaurant where the owner seated us on his rooftop and brought out dish after dish we didn't order, just waving his hand and saying, "You try, you try." Junie tried octopus for the first time and made a face I will treasure for the rest of my life. We stood at the Acropolis at golden hour, and she grabbed my arm and didn't say anything for a full 5 minutes. Just stood there looking out over the city with tears running down her face. Not sad tears, the kind you get when something you've imagined your whole life turns out to be even better than you pictured. That's when I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had made the right choice. On Monday morning, I finally turned my phone back on and started reading the texts. The first few were variations of the voicemails, disappointment, guilt trips, demands to call back. But then they started escalating. My mom had texted at least a dozen times. The progression went from, call me, to this is unacceptable, to I have never been so disappointed in you, to the one that really got me, your grandmother would be ashamed of you. My grandmother, who had been gone for 6 years, was being weaponized from beyond the grave. That was a new level of guilt tripping, even for my mother. Darla's texts were more dramatic. She sent me a picture of Bug crying with the caption, "This is what you are missing." She sent another one that said, "Rowan's mom cannot help either, so I guess I just have to cancel everything because nobody cares about me." Then she sent a long paragraph about how I had always been jealous of her, and this was my way of punishing her for being the favorite. My dad sent exactly one more text. It said, "Do not bother coming to Thanksgiving." That was in early October. The man was preemptively disinviting me from a holiday that was 7 weeks away. But here's the thing that really twisted the knife. While I was scrolling through the messages, I noticed something. Not a single person had asked where we were. Not one text said, "Are you guys okay?" Or "Did you make it safely?" Or "How was the trip?" It was all about what I wasn't doing for them. Nobody cared where I was. They only cared where I wasn't. I showed Junie the texts over breakfast at our hotel. She read through them slowly, sipping her coffee. When she finished, she set the phone down and said, "Oliver, I want to tell you something, and I want you to really hear it. They don't miss you. They miss what you do for them. There's a difference, and it is the difference that matters." I sat with that for a long time. Through the ferry to Mykonos, through the waterfront in Little Venice, through watching pelicans waddle around like they own the place. They don't miss you. They miss what you do for them. On our 4th night in Greece, Junie and I were sitting on a balcony in Santorini, the one she'd been dreaming about since she was 7 years old. The sun was going down, and the whole sky looked like it was on fire. She leaned against me and said, "Thank you for choosing us." And something shifted inside me. Something that had been bending for years finally broke. But it broke in a good way. I decided right there, watching the sun disappear into the Aegean, that things were going to change. I was done being the family ATM. I was done being the emergency babysitter, the emotional support brother, the guy who drops everything because someone else didn't plan their life properly. I wasn't going to be cruel about it. I wasn't going to burn bridges or send some dramatic manifesto. I was just going to stop volunteering to carry weight that was never mine to carry. We spent the rest of the trip exactly the way we planned. Junie filled her travel journal cover to cover. I ate more lamb than any one person should consume in a 2-week span. We laughed more than we had in years. We held hands like we were 22 again. For 14 days, nobody asked me for money. Nobody needed me to fix their problems. And nobody made me feel guilty for existing on my own terms. When we got home, I sent one text to my family group chat. It said, "We're home safe. Trip was wonderful. Hope everyone is doing well." Short, polite, neutral. My mom responded 3 hours later with, "Glad you had fun. Darla had to cancel her retreat. She is very upset. No, welcome home. No, glad you're safe." Just one more reminder that my happiness had cost Darla something. I didn't respond. And honestly, that silence felt like the most powerful thing I had done in 34 years. The first month after we got back from Greece was like living in a Cold War. Nobody called me. I didn't call them. For the first time since I could remember, my phone wasn't buzzing with requests from my family. And the silence was equal parts peaceful and unsettling. Like when you live next to train tracks your whole life, and then one day the train stops running. You should be relieved, but your brain keeps waiting for the rumble. Junie noticed the change in me right away. Not the family silence. She was thrilled about that. She noticed that I was lighter. I was sleeping better. I wasn't checking my phone every 20 minutes with that low-grade dread I used to carry around like a second wallet. She said it was like watching someone take off a backpack they had forgotten they were wearing. At work, things started shifting too. I'd been a lead engineer at Whitmore and Associates for about 3 years at that point, and I was good at my job, but I had always held back a little. Not on purpose, exactly. It's more that when you spend your whole life being told your accomplishments don't matter, you start believing it. You don't chase the big promotions. You don't speak up in meetings. You do solid work and hope someone notices. And when they don't, you tell yourself that's fine, because at least you're being helpful. But after Greece, something clicked. My buddy at work, this guy named Sullivan, took me aside one afternoon and said, "Oh well, you've got more talent in your left pinky than half the guys in the executive boardroom. When are you going to stop acting like you're grateful to be here and start acting like they're lucky to have you?" I started putting together a proposal for a project I'd been sitting on for over a year, a sustainable infrastructure design for a mixed-use development in the city. It was ambitious, way outside the scope of what our firm usually took on. Part of the reason I never brought it forward was because I could hear my dad's voice in the back of my head saying, "Don't get ahead of yourself." But I was done listening to that voice. I worked on the proposal for 3 weeks. Late nights, early mornings, weekends at the dining table with blueprints spread out while Junie brought me coffee and occasionally reminded me that humans need food. When I finally presented it to the partners at Whitmore, there was a silence in the room that lasted about 10 seconds. I thought I had crashed and burned. Then our senior partner, a woman named Cordelia, who had been in architecture and engineering for 30 years, looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Why did you not bring this to us sooner?" They greenlit the project. Not only that, they put me in charge of it with my own team. It was the single biggest professional opportunity of my career. And it happened because for the first time in my life, I wasn't using all my energy propping up people who didn't appreciate it. Meanwhile, the family Cold War continued. My cousin Emmett kept me updated through texts that read like dispatches from behind enemy lines. According to Emmett, my parents were telling extended family that I had abandoned Darla in her time of need to go on a lavish European vacation. The word lavish was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. They made it sound like I chartered a yacht while my sister sat alone in a dark room. The reality was that Darla had ended up asking Rowan's mother, a perfectly capable woman named Cordell, who lived 20 minutes away, to watch the kids. The very same Cordell who Darla's earlier text had claimed could not help. Funny how solutions appear when the designated doormat isn't available. Emmett also told me something that stuck with me. He said that at a family dinner I wasn't invited to, my mom had declared, "Oliver has always been difficult." Even as a child, he always wanted things to be about him. The kid who never had a birthday party that wasn't also Darla's celebration. The kid who wore hand-me-downs while his sister got new clothes. The kid who was told to be quiet every time he tried to share good news about himself. That kid was the one who wanted things to be about him. Around November, I got a text from Darla. The first direct communication in about 6 weeks. It said, Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner is December 8th. You should be there. Not an invitation, an instruction. Then the call came on December 3rd, 5 days before the dinner. It was from my dad, which immediately told me something was serious because Hank doesn't call. Hank texts 5-word sentences and considers that communication. Oliver, he said. No, hey, no, son, just Oliver, flat and serious. We need to talk. He told me that Rowan's latest business venture, some kind of online supplement company, hadn't just failed, it had failed spectacularly. He had taken out a personal loan against the house he and Darla were renting from my parents. That's right. My parents owned the house Darla lived in. They bought it years ago as an investment property and rented it to Darla and Rowan at well below market rate, which I had never been told about. So, not only had my parents been subsidizing Darla's lifestyle for years in ways I didn't even know about, but now Rowan had managed to drag a property my parents owned into his financial disaster. The lender was threatening to put a lien on the property. My parents' credit was at risk. They needed $25,000 to settle the debt and prevent things from getting worse. We need your help, Oliver. You're the only one in a position to handle this. What about Darla? What about her? Has she contributed anything? Has Rowan? Rowan doesn't have anything to contribute. You know that. And Darla is doing her best with the kids. Dad, I said, my voice rising a little. I have been doing my best too for years. And every time I did my best for this family, it wasn't enough, and it wasn't acknowledged. You texted me that I shouldn't bother coming to Thanksgiving because I took my wife on a trip we saved 2 years for. Another silence. Then, that was your mother's idea. And you sent it. I told my dad I needed time to think. He said, don't take too long, which was about as close to please as Hank gets. That night, I told Junie everything. She listened the way she always does, full attention, no interrupting, just absorbing. When I finished, she said, what do you want to do? And she emphasized you, Oliver, not the version of you that feels obligated. The real you. I don't want to just hand them money. Not this time. Not after everything. Then don't. But it's my parents. If they lose that property, their retirement is affected. They'll be in real trouble. Junie nodded. That's real. But here's the thing. If you bail them out with no conditions, nothing changes. You become the ATM again. Darla and Rowan face 0 consequences, and next year, it will be something else. She was right. She is always right. Over the next 2 days, I did something I had never done before. I consulted a financial advisor, a guy named Harlan that Sullivan had recommended. Harlan was a straight shooter with a handshake like a bear trap and a talent for making complicated things simple. I laid out the whole situation, family dynamics included, and asked him what he thought. Harlan leaned back in his chair and said, oh well, you've got the means to help, and that's a good position to be in, but you've also got leverage, and that's a better position. If you're going to put $25,000 on the table, you need to make sure it's a transaction, not a donation. Set terms, protect yourself, and make sure everyone in that family understands that the Bank of Oliver is closing permanently after this. So, that's what I did. I spent the next 2 days putting together what Junie jokingly called the Oliver Accords. It was a formal agreement, drafted with the help of a lawyer friend of Harlan's named Sloan, that outlined exactly what would happen if I agreed to help. The terms were simple. I would provide the $25,000 as a loan, not a gift. It would be repaid in full within 5 years at a modest interest rate. The repayment would be the responsibility of Darla and Rowan, since it was their mess, not my parents. There would be a signed promissory note. My parents would formally transfer ownership of the rental property into their own names only, removing any possibility of Rowan using it as collateral again. And Rowan would be required to complete a financial literacy course before any funds were dispersed. I also added a personal clause that Sloan said wasn't legally binding, but that I wanted in writing anyway. It stated that this was the final financial assistance I would provide to any family member. Period. Full stop. The well was dry after this. I drove to my parents' house on December 8th with a folder on the passenger seat and a calm in my chest that I hadn't expected. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was just ready. For 34 years, I had walked into that house trying to be small enough to fit the space they had made for me. Tonight, I was walking in at full height. The house smelled like Lorraine's pot roast. Darla was already there, sitting at the dining room table with Rowan, who was on his phone and looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. My parents were in the kitchen. My mom turned around and gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oliver, you came." Like she was surprised I had shown up to a dinner I said I would attend, like I was the unreliable one. We sat down to eat, and for about 20 minutes, it was almost normal. My mom talked about her garden club. My dad mentioned something about the gutters needing work. Darla complained about Cody's teacher. Nobody mentioned Greece. Nobody mentioned the 43 missed calls. Nobody mentioned the fact that we hadn't spoken properly in 2 months. We just pretended, the way my family has always pretended that if you don't talk about something, it didn't happen. I let it go on until dessert. My mom brought out a pie, and while she was cutting it, I set the folder on the table. "What is that?" Darla asked, eyeing it like I had placed a live animal on the tablecloth. "That's what I came to talk about," I said, looking at my dad. "You called me about the money situation. I've given it a lot of thought, and I've come up with a solution." The room went quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear the kitchen clock ticking. My mom sat down the pie server. My dad crossed his arms. Rowan finally put down his phone. I opened the folder and laid out the agreement. I explained each term calmly and clearly, the way I present a project proposal at work, the loan, the repayment schedule, the promissory note, the property transfer, the financial literacy course for Rowan, the clause about this being the last time. When I finished, nobody spoke for what felt like an eternity, but was probably about 15 seconds. Darla broke the silence first. "You're joking, right? You want us to sign a contract? I'm your sister, Oliver. Not a business deal." "You're right. You're my sister, and I love you," I said, my voice steady. "But I have given this family thousands of dollars over the years, and not once has anyone acknowledged it, thanked me for it, or paid me back. I'm not doing that again. If I'm going to help, there are going to be terms." "This is ridiculous," Darla said, looking at my parents for backup. "Mom, tell him this is ridiculous." My mom's mouth opened, but my dad spoke first. "Let me see it." He pulled the document toward him and started reading. My mom leaned over his shoulder. The room was so quiet I could hear Rowan breathing. After a minute, my dad looked up. "You want Darla and Rowan to repay you, not us." "That is correct. It's their debt. Rowan took out the loan. It should be their responsibility." "I can't afford that," Rowan said, speaking for the first time all night. "I'm between opportunities right now." "You've been between opportunities for 7 years, Rowan," I said, the way you state a fact. "The sky is blue, water is wet. Rowan is between opportunities. That's why there's a financial literacy course in the agreement, and that's why the repayment period is 5 years. I'm not asking for the money tomorrow. I'm asking for accountability." Darla stood up. "I cannot believe this. After everything Mom and Dad have done for you, this is how you treat family? You go on your fancy vacation, you disappear for months, and now you show up with a contract. And that's when something happened that I did not expect." My mom spoke. "Sit down, Darla." We all looked at her. Darla looked like she'd been slapped. My mom's face was doing something I had never seen before. Something that looked almost like shame. "Your brother," my mom said slowly, like she was choosing each word carefully, "is the only person in this family who has consistently shown up. He is the only one who has ever offered to help without being asked. And we have never, not once, treated him the way he deserved for it." She looked at me, and for the first time in my adult life, I saw my mother actually seeing me. "I owe you an apology, Oliver. A real one. Not for the phone call. For all of it." My dad cleared his throat. He looked uncomfortable, which for Hank meant he was experiencing a human emotion and didn't know where to put it. "Your mother is right. We leaned on you too hard. That was not fair." I won't pretend something didn't crack open in my chest when they said that. But I held it together because this was not the time for a breakdown. This was the time for a new beginning. And new beginnings require clear heads. Darla sat back down. She was crying. Real tears this time, not the performative kind. "I didn't know," she said quietly. I mean, I knew you helped, but I didn't know it was like that. I didn't know you felt like that. Because nobody asked, I said, not with anger, just truth. Rowan, to his credit, looked at the agreement and said, I'll sign it. And I'll do the course. Then he looked at me and said something he had never said in all the years I had known him. Thank you, Oliver. And I'm sorry. They signed both copies. My dad signed as a witness. My mom watched the whole thing with her hand over her mouth, and when it was done, she walked over to me and hugged me. A real hug. The kind that lasts long enough for you to feel it in your bones. That was 4 months ago. Darla and I have talked more in the last 4 months than we did in the previous 4 years. It's not perfect. We're not suddenly best friends. But she called me on my birthday last month, the first time she had remembered it without being reminded, and she said, I know I have a lot of making up to do. I'm going to try. That was enough for now. Rowan is 3 weeks into his financial literacy course. And according to Darla, he's actually engaged with it. He got a steady job at a distribution warehouse. Not glamorous, but steady, with benefits and a paycheck that shows up on time. My parents renegotiated the rental arrangement for the house, and Darla and Rowan are paying something closer to fair market value now, which Darla initially protested and then accepted when she realized this was what adult life actually looks like. My parents and I are in a different place. Not worse, not entirely better, just different. More honest. My mom has started asking me about my work, actually asking and listening to the answers. My dad isn't great with words, but he showed up at my office last week with a bag of bagels and said, saw this place on the way over. Thought you might be hungry. For Hank, that is basically a sonnet. The project at work is ahead of schedule. Sullivan took me out for a steak last week and said, I told you they were lucky to have you. Now everybody knows it. Cordelia mentioned the word partner in a meeting last month. And while I don't want to jinx anything, let's just say I didn't hate the sound of it. And Junie, my wonderful, patient, brilliant Junie, who saw through my family's nonsense long before I did and loved me anyway. Last Tuesday, she came home from work and found me in the kitchen attempting to recreate a pasta dish we had in Athens. It was terrible. Like, genuinely bad. She ate the whole plate and told me it was the best meal she had ever had. And when I called her a liar, she laughed and said, okay, it's awful, but you made it for me, and that's what matters. We're already planning our next trip, Portugal this time. And this time, when my phone rings the night before, I'm not going to hesitate. I'm going to smile, let it ring, and go to sleep next to the woman who taught me that choosing yourself is not selfish. It is necessary. So yeah, 43 missed calls, 27 texts, 1 voicemail that started with, I hope you are happy. I am. I really am. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family like this? Tell me what you think in the comments. I really want to know.